You are not losing focus because you are weak. You are losing focus because the world is designed to fracture your attention, hijack your emotions, and exhaust your self-control. Noise is not accidental. Distraction is not random. Every notification, every outrage, every urge to react is training you to surrender control. Slowly, silently, daily. This audiobook is not about motivation. It is about reclaiming authority over your mind in an environment that profits from your loss of it. If you master self-control in a noisy world, nothing outside you can dominate you again. Chapter 1. The world is loud because confused minds are easier to control. The world is loud on purpose. Not accidentally, not randomly, on purpose. Noise is not just sound. Noise is information without hierarchy. Noise is urgency without importance. Noise is stimulation without meaning. And when your mind is surrounded by noise, it becomes confused. A confused mind reacts. A reactive mind obeys. That's the key. You are not reacting because you are emotional. You are reacting because you are overstimulated. And overstimulation weakens authority. Noise weakens authority. Look around you. Notifications, headlines, opinions, outrage cycles, endless commentary. Everything is designed to pull you now. Everything demands immediate response. And when everything is urgent, nothing is important. You have a choice. You can live deliberately or you can live reactively. Most people choose reaction not because they want to, but because they've been trained to. Reaction feels active. It feels like participation. Feels like engagement. But reaction is obedience disguised as emotion. When you react, you surrender the timeline. You allow something outside you to decide when you think, what you feel, and how you respond. That is not freedom. That is submission. Noise weakens authority. An overstimulated person confuses movement with progress. Scrolling feels like learning. Arguing feels like thinking. Being busy feels like being productive. But none of it builds power. Power comes from clarity. Clarity requires silence. And silence cannot exist in a mind addicted to noise. You don't need their permission to slow down. You don't need approval to disengage. You don't need validation to step back and observe. You have a choice. Every time you react instantly, you reinforce a habit. The habit of surrender. The habit of letting the external world set your internal state. That's the key. Control does not begin with action. It begins with restraint. The loudest environments produce the weakest decisions. Because decision-making requires space. And noise removes space. When your mind is crowded, your standards collapse. You accept urgency instead of asking questions. You follow momentum instead of direction. It's not about intelligence. It's about discipline. Highly intelligent people still lose control in loud environments. Because intelligence without discipline becomes scattered. And scattered energy produces nothing. Noise weakens authority. Understand this clearly. A calm, slow, deliberate person is dangerous in a noisy world. Why? Because they cannot be rushed. They cannot be provoked easily. They do not respond on command. They decide. And decision-making is the highest form of power. The world benefits when you are confused. Confused people buy more, argue more, react more, think less. Confusion creates dependency. Dependency creates control. You have a choice. You don't need to fight the noise. You need to stop obeying it. Most people think self-control means forcing themselves to do more. Wrong. Self-control starts with refusing to respond to everything. That's the key. Every time you pause instead of react, you reclaim authority. Every time you delay a response, you strengthen your nervous system. Every time you choose silence over commentary, you build internal order. Noise trains impatience. Impatience destroys judgment. And destroyed judgment leads to regret. This is why calm people look slow but win long-term. This is why reactive people look active but burn out. You don't need their permission to be quiet. You don't need to announce your disengagement. You don't need to explain your standards. Silence is not weakness. Silence is filtering. Noise weakens authority. Think of your mind like a command center. Every alert cannot be treated as an emergency. Every signal cannot be acted on. If everything enters, nothing is controlled. The disciplined mind asks one question before reacting. Does this deserve access to my attention? Most things don't. That's the key. The loud world wants your immediate emotion because emotion bypasses logic. Emotion skips evaluation. Emotion creates compliance. Calm restores sequence. Calm brings evaluation back online. Calm returns decision-making to you. You have a choice. You can live as a responder or as an authority. Authorities are not loud. They don't rush. They don't chase every signal. They observe. They decide. They act when it matters. It's not about avoiding the world. It's about governing your relationship to it. The goal is not isolation. The goal is selectivity. When you become selective, noise loses power. When noise loses power, clarity returns. When clarity returns, discipline becomes possible. Noise weakens authority. This chapter is not asking you to mute the world completely. It is asking you to stop treating everything as important. Urgency is a lie unless you decide it isn't. You have a choice. And here is your instruction for this chapter. For the next 24 hours, delay every non-essential response. Messages, opinions, reactions. Pause before answering. Breathe before engaging. Notice how much of the noise dissolves when you don't obey it. That's the key. You don't control the volume of the world, but you control the access it has to you. Master this and you stop being confused. Stop being confused and you stop being controlled. You've learned why the world is loud. Now it's time to understand what the noise is stealing from you. Because noise doesn't take your time. Take something far more valuable. You mastered the illusion of urgency. Now let's talk about the true currency of your life. Chapter 2. Attention is your real currency, not time. Time passes whether you are disciplined or not. Time does not ask for permission. Time does not wait for clarity. Attention is different. Attention is chosen. Attention is directed. Attention decides what your life becomes. That's the key. Most people say they don't have enough time. That's not true. They have time. They lack control over their attention. You have the same 24 hours as anyone who has built power, stability, and results. The difference is not time. The difference is where attention goes. Where my attention goes, my life follows. A distracted mind spends energy everywhere and builds nothing anywhere. It starts many things and finishes nothing. It reacts to everything and commits to nothing. That is not a character flaw. It is a discipline problem. You have a choice. You can let attention scatter or you can aim it. Every moment you give attention to something, you are investing. And every investment produces a return. Distraction produces chaos. Focus produces structure. That's the key. People waste years trying to manage time with calendars, apps, and systems, while never once asking what deserves their attention. Time management without attention control is useless. You can schedule a day perfectly and still waste your life if your attention is hijacked. Where my attention goes, my life follows. Look at the average day. Attention jumps from message to message, from thought to thought, from impulse to impulse. No depth, no continuity, no momentum. This creates the illusion of busyness. But busyness is not progress. Progress requires sustained attention. Sustained attention requires discipline. Discipline requires saying no constantly. You don't need their permission to focus. You don't need approval to ignore distractions. You don't need validation to work quietly. You have a choice. Every interruption resets momentum. Every distraction taxes your nervous system. Every shift of attention costs more than you think. That's the key. When attention fragments, energy leaks. When energy leaks, willpower collapses. When willpower collapses, self-control disappears. This is why distracted people feel tired without doing much. They are not lazy. They are leaking energy everywhere. Where my attention goes, my life follows. A focused hour is more powerful than 10 distracted hours. A single uninterrupted decision can outweigh weeks of reactive effort. But focus feels uncomfortable at first, because focus removes stimulation, and stimulation has become the default. The distracted mind craves novelty. The disciplined mind tolerates stillness. That's the difference. Attention is not neutral. Whatever holds it shapes you. If your attention lives in outrage, you become reactive. If your attention lives in comparison, you become insecure. If your attention lives in noise, you become scattered. You have a choice. Attention is the doorway through which everything enters your mind. If you don't guard the doorway, you don't control what shapes you. That's the key. Most people protect their money more than their attention. But money can be recovered. Attention cannot. Once attention is spent, the moment is gone. The habit is reinforced. The identity is shaped. Where my attention goes, my life follows. This is why the world competes so aggressively for it. Because whoever controls attention influences behavior. And behavior determines outcomes. The goal is not to eliminate distractions completely. The goal is to decide in advance what deserves access. Decision precedes discipline. If you wait until temptation arrives, you've already lost. You must decide before the moment. You don't need their permission to set standards. You don't need consensus to protect your focus. You don't need explanation to say no. You have a choice. Here is the truth most people avoid. Your life today is a reflection of what you consistently paid attention to yesterday. That's the key. Skills are built through attention. Confidence is built through attention. Clarity is built through attention. Neglect attention and everything decays. Where my attention goes, my life follows. So what do? You stop treating attention as infinite. You stop giving it away impulsively. You start assigning it deliberately. One task at a time. One thought at a time. One decision at a time. Multitasking is not efficiency. It is fragmentation. Fragmentation weakens authority. Authority requires coherence. That's the key. Your instruction for this chapter is simple but uncomfortable. For the next 7 days, do one thing at a time. No background noise. No constant checking. No divided focus. When your mind drifts, bring it back. Not aggressively, firmly. You are training attention like a muscle, and muscles grow through resistance. You have a choice. Each moment of refocus is a vote for discipline. Each ignored distraction is a deposit into self-control. Each completed task builds momentum. Where my attention goes, my life follows. This chapter is not about productivity. It is about power. Power begins when you decide what matters and ignore the rest. Master attention, and time starts working for you instead of against you. Master attention, and noise loses its grip. Master attention, and self-control becomes possible. You now understand the real currency of your life. Next, you must understand why that currency is constantly being stolen. Because attention is not just drifting. It is being provoked. You've learned what truly matters. Now let's talk about why you keep losing it. Chapter 3. Emotional reactivity is a trained habit, not a personality. You were not born reactive. You were trained. That's the truth most people never confront. Outrage is not who you are. Anxiety is not your identity. Impulsive response is not your nature. They are habits, and habits are learned, reinforced, and repeated. That's the key. Every emotional spike you experience did not appear by accident. It was triggered, rewarded, strengthened. Reaction is conditioning. Look closely at your day. How often do you feel a sudden surge of emotion without choosing it? Anger, fear, excitement, urgency. That surge is not spontaneous. It is stimulus followed by response. And repeated responses become automatic. You have a choice. You can continue to believe, this is just how I am. Or you can recognize that what was trained can be retrained. Most people choose the first option because it removes responsibility. But it also removes power. That's the key. Emotional reactivity feels personal, but it's mechanical. Something happens. Your nervous system fires. You respond before thinking. That loop has been practiced thousands of times. Reaction is conditioning. The modern environment rewards emotional speed, not emotional control. The faster you react, the more visible you become. The more extreme your emotion, the more attention you receive. Algorithms don't care about truth. They care about engagement. And nothing engages like emotion. Emotion bypasses thinking. It skips evaluation. It shortcuts reason. That's why it's profitable. You don't need their permission to slow down. You don't need approval to stay neutral. You don't need validation to refuse emotional bait. You have a choice. Every time you react instantly, you strengthen the conditioning. Every time you pause, you weaken it. That's the key. Most people believe self-control means calming down. Wrong. Self-control means interrupting the loop. Stimulus. Pause. Decision. Without the pause, there is no control. There is only reflex. Reaction is conditioning. Notice how outrage spreads faster than insight. Notice how anxiety spreads faster than clarity. Notice how impulsive opinions spread faster than thoughtful ones. This is not because people are bad. It's because emotion is easier than thinking. Thinking requires energy. Emotion requires exposure. The more you expose yourself to emotional triggers, the more reactive you become without realizing it. You have a choice. You can consume content that trains patience, or content that trains urgency. One builds discipline. The other builds dependence. That's the key. Reactivity creates the illusion of strength. Strong opinions, fast responses, loud certainty. But real strength is restraint. Real strength is delayed response. Real strength is emotional neutrality under pressure. Reaction is conditioning. Ask yourself this honestly. How often do you feel compelled to respond, even when silence would serve you better? That compulsion is not character. It is training. The mind learns what it practices. If it practices reaction, it becomes reactive. If it practices pause, it becomes composed. You don't need their permission to pause. You don't need to justify silence. You don't need to explain why you're not reacting. You have a choice. Reactivity keeps you externally governed. Your mood depends on headlines. Your energy depends on messages. Your focus depends on noise. That is not freedom. Freedom is internal governance. That's the key. The emotionally reactive person feels constantly on edge. Not because life is harder, but because their nervous system is overloaded. Every alert feels personal. Every disagreement feels like a threat. Every delay feels intolerable. This is not sensitivity. It is overstimulation. Reaction is conditioning. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If you are constantly reactive, you are easy to steer. Not because you are weak, but because you are predictable. Stimulus produces response. Response produces engagement. Engagement produces control. You have a choice. The moment you stop responding on cue, you become difficult to manipulate. Calm breaks the pattern. Delay disrupts the system. That's the key. This chapter is not asking you to suppress emotion. Suppression creates pressure. Pressure eventually explodes. This chapter is asking you to retrain response. Emotion can arise, but it does not get to decide action. That separation is power. Reaction is conditioning. Here is your instruction for this chapter. For the next 3 days, practice delayed response. When something triggers emotion, do nothing for 10 seconds. No reply, no comment, no action. Just breathe. Notice what happens. The urge weakens. The clarity returns. That pause is not passive. It is active discipline. You are retraining your nervous system to wait. You have a choice. Every delayed reaction weakens the habit. Every conscious pause strengthens control. Every calm decision rewires identity. Reaction is conditioning. Most people wait for calm before acting. Disciplined people act in a way that creates calm. That's the difference. You are not your reactions. You are the one who can choose whether they become actions. Once you see this, emotional chaos loses its mystery. It becomes a system, and systems can be changed. You've learned that reactivity is trained. Now you must understand the cost of staying that way, because every reaction gives something away. You've learned how emotions hijack you. Now let's talk about what they steal when you let them. Chapter 4. If you can be provoked, you can be controlled. If someone can provoke you, they can steer you. If they can steer you, they can control you. That is not philosophy. That is mechanics. Every emotional trigger is a handle on your nervous system. grab the handle and you move. That's the key. Anger, defensiveness, urgency, the need to explain yourself. These are not just feelings. They are access points. And most people walk through life covered in exposed handles, wondering why they feel exhausted, reactive, and drained. I deny access. Provocation works because it bypasses choice. It skips consent. It forces response. When someone insults you and you react, they just controlled your emotional state. When a headline enrages you and you spiral, it just decided your mood. When a notification pulls you instantly, it just commanded your attention. You have a choice. You can keep giving access, or you can shut the door. That's the key. Calm people are difficult to manipulate, not because they are smarter, but because they are unreachable. They do not grant instant access to their nervous system. They do not respond on cue. They do not explain themselves under pressure. They decide if something deserves a response. I deny access. Provocation is a test. Always. It tests whether you are internally governed or externally controlled. The reactive person fails instantly. The calm person delays and wins. Delay breaks the chain. Stimulus. Pause. Decision. Remove the pause and you are programmable. That's the key. Most people think being provoked means being attacked. Wrong. Provocation can be subtle. A look, comment, a comparison, a sense of being ignored. Anything that triggers an emotional reflex is a provocation. And the moment you feel compelled to respond, you've lost leverage. I deny access. Notice how manipulators operate. They poke. They hint. They imply. They wait for the reaction. Once you react, they escalate. Because they now know where the handle is. You have a choice. You can teach people how to control you, or you can teach them you are not available for manipulation. Silence is often the strongest response. Not passive silence. Deliberate silence. That's the key. Calm is not weakness. Calm is a boundary. Says, you don't decide my state. Most people fear this because they think not reacting means losing status. In reality, it increases it. The person who doesn't react signals confidence. The person who doesn't rush signals authority. The person who stays calm signals control. I deny access. Provocation feeds on urgency. It needs speed to survive. Slow the interaction, and the provocation collapses. This is why arguments escalate when both sides react instantly. This is why drama dies when one side refuses to engage. You don't need their permission to disengage. You don't need to announce your boundary. You don't need to justify your calm. You have a choice. Every time you refuse to be provoked, you reclaim power. Every time you stay neutral, you strengthen your nervous system. Every time you choose restraint, you build authority. That's the key. Being provoked feels personal, but it's not. It's mechanical. Someone applies pressure. Your system responds. Change the response and the pressure loses effect. I deny access. This is especially true in digital environments. Online provocation is engineered. Outrage headlines. Polarizing statements. Bait disguised as information. Why? Because provoked people click. Provoked people comment. Provoked people share. Calm people don't feed the system. That makes them dangerous to the system. You have a choice. You can be fuel, or you can be fireproof. Fireproof people don't panic when sparks fly. They don't rush to explain. They don't chase validation. They stand still. That's the key. Understand this clearly. You don't need to win every interaction. You need to win control over yourself. Most losses in life don't come from lack of ability. They come from loss of composure. Composure keeps options open. Reaction closes them. I deny access. Here is the uncomfortable truth. If someone knows exactly how to upset you, they own leverage over you. Your job is not to eliminate emotion. Your job is to remove predictability. Unpredictable people are hard to manipulate. Calm people are unpredictable. Why? Because they don't react the way others expect. That's the key. This chapter is not asking you to become passive. It is asking you to become selective. Some things deserve response. Most things don't. The disciplined person decides in advance what qualifies. You don't need their permission to have standards. You don't need approval to protect your nervous system. You don't need validation to remain calm. You have a choice. Here is your instruction for this chapter. Identify your top 3 emotional triggers, the things that reliably provoke you. Then make a rule. When triggered, you do nothing for 60 seconds. No speaking, no typing, no explaining. Just breathe. That pause is not weakness. It is leverage. I deny access. Watch what happens when you stop reacting on schedule. People lose control over you. Situations de-escalate. Your mind stays clear. You become internally governed. Once provocation loses power, manipulation collapses. Once manipulation collapses, clarity emerges. Once clarity emerges, discipline becomes possible. You've learned how provocation controls people. Now you must learn the advantage of silence itself. Because silence is not emptiness. It is strategy. You've learned to deny access. Now let's talk about the weapon calm people use most effectively. Chapter 5. Silence is a strategic advantage. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is space. And space is where power lives. Most people fear silence because silence removes stimulation. And without stimulation, they are left with themselves. That's the key. Silence creates distance between stimulus and response. That distance is choice. That distance is control. Without it, there is only reflex. Stillness precedes strength. The world teaches you that loudness equals power. Fast replies, strong opinions, immediate reactions. But real power moves quietly. The most dangerous decisions are made in silence. The strongest people do not announce themselves. The most disciplined minds do not explain everything. You have a choice. You can fill every gap with noise, or you can let silence do the work. That's the key. A loud mind leaks energy, constant thoughts, constant commentary, constant internal dialogue. This mental noise drains you faster than physical labor. A quiet mind accumulates energy, conserves, stores, it compounds. Stillness precedes strength. Silence is not the absence of action. It is the absence of unnecessary action. Most people speak to release tension. They explain to relieve discomfort. They react to feel alive. But every unnecessary word leaks authority. The more you talk under pressure, the less leverage you have. That's the key. Silence unsettles undisciplined people. Because silence removes feedback. And people addicted to reaction crave feedback. When you stay silent, you force others to reveal themselves. They fill the gap. They over-explain. They escalate. You observe. Stillness precedes strength. Think about arguments. They don't escalate because of logic. They escalate because of speed. One reaction triggers another. Volume rises. Clarity disappears. Silence interrupts escalation. It slows the exchange. It restores sequence. Puts you back in control. You don't need their permission to be silent. You don't need to announce your pause. You don't need to justify your restraint. You have a choice. Silence is a boundary. Says, I will not be rushed. That's the key. Quiet people are not passive. They are selective. They choose when to speak because they understand that words are tools. And tools are wasted when used impulsively. Stillness precedes strength. Notice how leaders behave under pressure. They don't speak immediately. They don't react emotionally. They pause. That pause is not uncertainty. It is calculation. They are buying time. Time to think. Time to decide. Time is leverage. The reactive person gives leverage away instantly. The silent person accumulates it. You have a choice. The nervous system responds to silence differently than to noise. Silence calms it. Noise agitates it. When your nervous system is calm, your thinking improves. When your thinking improves, your decisions improve. When your decisions improve, your life stabilizes. That's the key. Silence also exposes truth. When you stop filling space with words, patterns emerge. You notice what matters. You notice what doesn't. Noise hides reality. Silence reveals it. Stillness precedes strength. Most people fear silence because they associate it with weakness or loss. They think if they don't respond, they lose ground. In reality, the opposite is true. Silence denies others the satisfaction of reaction. It denies escalation fuel. It denies manipulation access. Calm people are hard to corner because they don't rush. You don't need their permission to wait. You don't need approval to think first. You don't need validation to remain quiet. You have a choice. Silence trains discipline. Every moment you resist the urge to speak, you strengthen restraint. Every pause builds emotional control. That's the key. This applies internally as well. Not just external silence, but internal silence. Endless internal commentary drains energy. Replaying conversations. Imagining arguments. Anticipating reactions. This is noise too. A quiet mind does not rehearse drama. It focuses on action. Stillness precedes strength. The strongest people are not constantly thinking about what others think. They are thinking about what they must do. Silence removes the audience from your mind. When there is no audience, there is no performance. When there is no performance, there is authenticity. When there is authenticity, there is power. You have a choice. You can narrate your life, or you can live it. That's the key. Here is your instruction for this chapter. Practice deliberate silence. For the next 5 days, do not fill pauses unnecessarily. Do not explain unless asked. Do not respond immediately unless required. Let silence do the work. Notice what happens. Conversations slow. People reveal more. Your mind stays calm. Stillness precedes strength. This is not about withdrawing from life. It is about refusing to leak energy. Energy is finite. Silence preserves it. Noise wastes it. When energy is preserved, discipline becomes easier. When discipline becomes easier, consistency follows. When consistency follows, control becomes identity. You've learned that silence creates space. Now you must learn what to do with that space. Because silence alone is not enough. It must be used correctly. You've learned to be still. Now let's talk about how to direct what rises inside that stillness. Chapter 6. Self-control is not suppression, it is direction. Most people misunderstand self-control. They think it means pushing emotions down, ignoring them, locking them away. That's not control. That's compression. And compression always explodes. That's the key. Suppressing emotion creates pressure. Pressure builds silently. Then it leaks. Through anger, burnout, resentment, or collapse. Directed emotion creates momentum. I direct, not suppress. Emotion is energy. Raw, powerful, neutral. It is not good or bad. It is fuel. The problem is not emotion. The problem is undirected emotion. You have a choice. You can let emotion spill everywhere, or you can aim it. That's the key. Anger, when undirected, becomes reactivity. When directed, it becomes boundaries. Fear, when undirected, becomes anxiety. When directed, it becomes preparation. Desire, when undirected, becomes impulsive behavior. When directed, it becomes discipline. I direct, not suppress. Suppression says, this emotion is dangerous. Direction says, this emotion is useful. Disciplined people don't feel less. They channel more. They feel fully but act selectively. That is control. Most people lose control because they try to fight emotion instead of commanding it. They say, I shouldn't feel this. Then the feeling grows stronger. Resistance feeds emotion. Direction transforms it. That's the key. Think of emotion like a current. You don't stop a current by standing against it. You redirect it. Stand in resistance and you exhaust yourself. Redirect it and you move forward. I direct, not suppress. This is why suppressed people eventually snap. They appear calm until they aren't. They appear disciplined until pressure peaks. True discipline is flexible, not rigid. It moves emotion forward instead of trapping it inside. You have a choice. When emotion rises, you can ask one question. What is this energy for? That question turns chaos into clarity. That's the key. Emotion always wants action. If you don't give it a productive outlet, it will find a destructive one. Unexpressed anger becomes irritation. Unchanneled fear becomes paralysis. Unfocused desire becomes distraction. Direction prevents decay. I direct, not suppress. Discipline is not emotional numbness. It is emotional precision. It means you don't let emotion choose the action. You choose the action and let emotion fuel it. Calm people are not empty. They are aligned. Their inner energy moves in one direction. That direction is chosen. You don't need their permission to feel strongly. You don't need approval to be intense. You don't need validation to use emotion constructively. You have a choice. Most emotional outbursts are not too much emotion. They are misdirected emotion. The energy had nowhere to go. That's the key. Think about disciplined athletes. They feel nerves. They feel pressure. They feel fear. But they don't suppress it. They channel it into focus. The same applies to life. Self-control is not about reducing intensity. It is about aiming intensity. I direct, not suppress. Suppression makes you brittle. Direction makes you resilient. Brittle people break under pressure. Resilient people convert pressure into force. This is why disciplined people look calm even when they are intense inside. Their energy is moving forward, not outward. You have a choice. The next time emotion arises, don't ask, "How do I make this go away?" Ask, "How do I use this?" That's the key. Anger can be used to establish standards. Fear can be used to prepare intelligently. Excitement can be used to build consistency. Emotion does not disappear when directed. Transforms. I direct, not suppress. This chapter is especially important because many people confuse emotional detachment with emotional avoidance. Detachment is not avoidance. Detachment is leadership. Leadership of the self. You don't silence emotion. You assign it a role. When emotion has a role, it stops demanding attention. That's the key. Most people are ruled by their emotions because their emotions have no structure, no direction, no outlet. Structure creates stability. Stability creates control. You don't need their permission to structure your inner world. You don't need approval to choose discipline over drama. You don't need validation to stop leaking emotion outward. You have a choice. Here is your instruction for this chapter. For the next week, when a strong emotion appears, do not react externally. Instead, identify the emotion. Name it. Choose a productive action that uses its energy. Angry? Channel it into decisive work. Anxious? Channel it into preparation. Restless? Channel it into physical movement or focus creation. That's the key. You are teaching your nervous system a new rule. Emotion does not control action. Action commands emotion. I direct, not suppress. Over time, emotion stops feeling overwhelming. Not because it's weaker, but because it's organized. Discipline is organization of inner energy. Once your energy moves in one direction, momentum builds. Once momentum builds, consistency becomes easier. Once consistency becomes easier, self-control becomes identity. You've learned how to use emotion instead of fighting it. Now you must learn what supports or destroys that ability beneath the surface. Because self-control does not begin in the mind alone. It begins in the body. You've learned to direct inner energy. Now let's talk about the system that decides whether that direction holds. Chapter 7. The nervous system decides before the mind does. You don't lose self-control because you lack discipline. You lose it because your system is unstable. That's the truth most people ignore. The nervous system decides before the mind does. Always. By the time you choose, your body has already voted. That's the key. Exhaustion lowers self-control faster than temptation ever could. Not because you are weak, but because depleted systems default to survival. And survival does not prioritize discipline. Prioritizes relief. Stability creates clarity. When your nervous system is overloaded, every decision feels urgent. Every impulse feels justified. Every shortcut feels necessary. This is not moral failure. It is biological reality. You have a choice. You can keep blaming willpower, or you can stabilize the system that makes willpower possible. That's the key. A dysregulated nervous system seeks stimulation. Sugar, noise, drama, distraction. Why? Because stimulation feels like relief. But relief is not control. Relief is escape. Stability creates clarity. This is why tired people make decisions they regret. Why stressed people react impulsively. Why overwhelmed people abandon discipline they believe in. Belief does not override biology. Stability comes first. Most people try to control behavior without controlling the conditions that shape it. That is backwards. You don't rise to your intentions. You fall to your nervous system. That's the key. Sleep is not optional. It is regulatory. A sleep-deprived mind cannot evaluate long-term consequences. It seeks immediate reward. It trades future stability for present relief. That's not laziness. That's chemistry. Stability creates clarity. Breath is not just air. Breath is regulation. Fast, shallow breathing signals threat. Threat narrows thinking. Narrow thinking reduces options. Slow, controlled breathing signals safety. Safety restores choice. That's the key. Routine is not boring. Routine is protective. Routine removes decision fatigue. Creates predictability. Predictability calms the nervous system. A calm nervous system supports discipline. You have a choice. You can live reactively, deciding everything in the moment, or you can predecide through routine. Predecision is power. Stability creates clarity. People often say, "I just wasn't strong enough." What they mean is, "I was exhausted." Strength collapses under instability. No one performs at their best when depleted. No one stays disciplined when overwhelmed. No one thinks clearly when chronically stressed. This is not a mindset issue. It is a systems issue. That's the key. The disciplined person does not rely on motivation. They rely on structure. Structure protects energy. Energy protects judgment. Judgment protects self-control. Stability creates clarity. Look at moments when you lose control. Late at night, under stress, after poor sleep, when routine collapses. That pattern is not coincidence. It is cause and effect. You have a choice. You can keep fighting symptoms, or you can stabilize the foundation. The nervous system wants rhythm, regular sleep, consistent meals, predictable movement. Chaos outside creates chaos inside. That's the key. This chapter is not about optimization. It is about survival-level discipline. You cannot command a system that is constantly overloaded. Stability is not indulgence. It is strategy. Stability creates clarity. When your system is stable, urges weaken, emotions slow, decisions improve. Not because you are more virtuous, but because you are regulated. Calm is not personality. Calm is physiology. You don't need their permission to rest. You don't need approval to protect sleep. You don't need validation to build routine. You have a choice. Here is your instruction for this chapter. For the next 7 days, prioritize regulation over productivity. That means, go to sleep at the same time every night. Wake at the same time every morning. Practice slow breathing when stressed. Eat and move consistently. This is not self-care. This is command preparation. That's the key. You are stabilizing the platform from which discipline operates. Once stability is present, clarity follows. Once clarity follows, self-control becomes reliable. Once self-control becomes reliable, identity shifts. Stability creates clarity. Most people try to think their way into discipline. Disciplined people regulate their way into it. The body leads. The mind follows. You've learned that control begins beneath thought itself. Now you must face the environment that constantly destabilizes it. Because stability is fragile in a world designed to fragment you. You've learned how to stabilize the system. Now let's talk about what keeps sabotaging it daily. Chapter 8. Digital overstimulation is psychological junk food. Digital overstimulation doesn't feel dangerous. That's why it works. Feels harmless, entertaining, normal. But psychological junk food never announces itself as poison. That's the key. Constant novelty trains impatience. Every swipe teaches your brain to expect something new. Every scroll shortens your tolerance for stillness. And when stillness disappears, depth becomes impossible. I choose depth over noise. The mind adapts to what it consumes. Feed it fragments and it becomes fragmented. Feed it depth and it becomes capable of focus. You cannot build a disciplined mind on fragmented input. That would be like building strength on sugar. Feels good in the moment. Collapses over time. You have a choice. Digital junk food delivers stimulation without effort. No resistance. No commitment. No patience required. But discipline is built through resistance. That's the key. The more novelty you consume, the more novelty you crave. The more you crave, the harder it becomes to stay with one thing. Reading feels slow. Thinking feels heavy. Silence feels uncomfortable. That is not boredom. That is withdrawal. I choose depth over noise. A distracted mind avoids depth because depth requires patience. Patience feels painful to a brain trained on instant reward. This is why people can't focus anymore. Not because they lost ability, but because they trained impatience. You have a choice. Every piece of content you consume is training your attention span. Every quick hit weakens it. Every sustained focus strengthens it. That's the key. Digital overstimulation doesn't just steal time. It steals your ability to stay with difficulty. And difficulty is where growth lives. When you escape difficulty constantly, you escape development. I choose depth over noise. Notice how fragmented input creates shallow thinking. Strong opinions without understanding. Quick reactions without reflection. Confidence without competence. Depth builds perspective. Perspective builds restraint. Restraint builds power. Noise builds reaction. You don't need their permission to disconnect. You don't need approval to consume less. You don't need validation to choose long-form thinking over short bursts. You have a choice. The most disciplined people are not more motivated. They are less stimulated. That's the key. Overstimulated minds seek relief, not growth. Relief feels like scrolling. Growth feels like effort. One weakens you. One strengthens you. I choose depth over noise. This chapter is not anti-technology. It is anti-fragmentation. Tools are not the enemy. Dependency is. If you can't sit with one task without checking something else, your attention is not yours. Attention that is not yours cannot be disciplined. That's the key. Digital junk food creates the illusion of rest. But it doesn't restore energy. Scatters it. True rest restores focus. Noise drains it. You have a choice. The more you consume without intention, the less intentional you become. Consumption shapes identity. I choose depth over noise. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Most people know digital overload is harming them, but they keep consuming because stopping feels uncomfortable. That discomfort is the training point. Discipline grows where discomfort is tolerated. That's the key. Here is your instruction for this chapter. For the next 7 days, eliminate low-effort novelty. No endless scrolling. No rapid content switching. No background stimulation while working. Replace it with depth. One long-form book, one focused task at a time, one quiet block daily. This is not deprivation. This is reconditioning. I choose depth over noise. At first, your mind will resist. It will seek stimulation. It will crave novelty. That is the habit breaking. Stay with it. Within days, focus returns. Patience increases. Clarity sharpens. Depth rebuilds what noise destroyed. You don't need their permission to think deeply. You don't need approval to be unavailable. You don't need validation to be disciplined. You have a choice. Fragmented input produces fragmented lives. Focused input produces focused people. Once depth returns, discipline stabilizes. Once discipline stabilizes, self-control becomes natural. You've learned what digital noise does to the mind. Now you must learn how to protect yourself from it consistently. Because choosing depth once is not enough. It must be enforced. You've learned to reject junk input. Now let's talk about the filter that decides what gets in. Chapter 9. Build an internal filter or become a public reaction machine. If you don't have an internal filter, you become public property. Everything enters. Everything affects you. Everything demands response. That's the key. Without a filter, your mind is an open door. Noise walks in. Opinions sit down. Emotions rearrange the furniture. And you wonder why you feel scattered. Not everything deserves me. A filter is not avoidance. It is selection. It decides what gets access to your attention, your emotion, and your energy. Without it, you live reactively. With it, you live deliberately. You have a choice. Most people believe being open is a virtue. In reality, unfiltered openness creates instability. Standards create stability. Standards protect focus. Standards preserve self-control. That's the key. Every input asks a question, even if silently. Do I get access? If you don't answer consciously, your nervous system answers automatically. And automatic answers are rarely wise. Not everything deserves me. Look at people who feel constantly drained. They respond to everything. They explain themselves constantly. They engage with nonsense. That is not kindness. That is lack of filtering. The disciplined person is not cold. They are selective. Selection is respect for your energy. You don't need their permission to ignore. You don't need approval to disengage. You don't need validation to remain silent. You have a choice. Standards decide what deserves your response, and most things don't. That's the key. Every response costs something. Time, energy, focus. If you spend these on low-value input, you have nothing left for what matters. A public reaction machine cannot build a private life of depth. Not everything deserves me. Filters operate on principles, not moods. Moods are unstable. Principles are consistent. If you decide in advance what matters, you don't negotiate in the moment. Negotiation creates weakness. Predecision creates strength. That's the key. Ask yourself honestly, how many things do you respond to out of habit, not importance? Messages you didn't need to answer. Opinions you didn't need to engage. Thoughts you didn't need to entertain. Without a filter, the mind chases everything. With a filter, it moves only when aligned. Not everything deserves me. The world rewards people who react publicly. Likes, tension, visibility. But visibility is not value. Most visible reactions are forgettable. Most quiet decisions compound. Depth is built in private. Noise is performed in public. You have a choice. The filter protects you from emotional theft. Because not every emotion deserves housing in your mind. Outrage is contagious. Anxiety spreads. Drama multiplies. Filters stop the spread. That's the key. A strong filter asks 3 questions before responding. Does this matter long term? Does this align with my values? Does responding improve my life or just relieve tension? If the answer is no, silence is the response. Not everything deserves me. Most people respond to feel relief. Not because it's useful. They speak to release pressure. They comment to discharge emotion. But relief is temporary. Regret lasts longer. Filters trade short-term relief for long-term control. That's the key. This applies internally as well. Not every thought deserves attention. Not every feeling deserves action. If you identify with every thought, you lose control. If you filter thoughts, you gain distance. Distance creates clarity. You don't need their permission to ignore your own mental noise. You don't need approval to stop rehearsing arguments. You don't need validation to focus on action. You have a choice. The internal filter is what separates leaders from reactors. Leaders decide what matters. Reactors respond to what appears. Not everything deserves me. Without standards, emotions decide. With standards, identity decides. Identity is stable. Emotion is temporary. Build decisions on identity, not feelings. That's the key. The public reaction machine feels involved in everything, but owns nothing. The filtered individual engages selectively and builds something meaningful. Less reaction, more direction. You don't need to attend every fight. You don't need to correct every opinion. You don't need to be available to everyone. You have a choice. This chapter is not about withdrawal. It is about sovereignty. Sovereignty means you decide what enters your inner world. Not everything deserves me. Here is your instruction for this chapter. Define your filter explicitly. Write down what deserves your attention, what deserves your emotional energy, what deserves your response. Everything else is noise. Then enforce it. Not aggressively, quietly, consistently. That's the key. At first, people may push. They are used to access. Hold the boundary. Over time, the pressure stops. The noise fades. Your clarity increases. You stop being predictable. You stop being reactive. You stop being controllable. Not everything deserves me. When the filter is in place, self-control stabilizes. Because fewer things compete for your energy. Fewer inputs. Fewer reactions. Fewer regrets. Control becomes default. You've learned how to protect yourself from noise. Now you must step into the final shift. Because discipline, clarity, and control are not techniques. They are identity. You've learned to filter the world. Now let's talk about who you become when nothing outside you governs you anymore. Chapter 10. Become internally governed in an externally chaotic world. The world will not become calmer for you. That is not its job. Your job is to become governed from within. That's the key. True self-control means your internal state no longer negotiates with chaos. It does not bargain. It does not react. It does not ask permission. It decides. I govern myself. Most people live externally governed lives. Their mood depends on circumstances. Their focus depends on noise levels. Their discipline depends on motivation. That is not control. That is dependency. You have a choice. You can continue outsourcing authority, or you can reclaim it. That's the key. An internally governed person does not need ideal conditions. They do not wait for quiet. They do not wait for clarity to appear. They bring clarity with them. I govern myself. Calm, consistency, and discipline are not separate traits. They are expressions of the same identity. Calm is emotional governance. Consistency is behavioral governance. Discipline is directional governance. When they merge, chaos loses leverage. You stop negotiating with moods. You stop renegotiating standards daily. You stop being surprised by your own behavior. That's the key. Most people think freedom means flexibility. But flexibility without structure becomes instability. True freedom comes from self-command. When you command yourself, you don't need control over others. You don't need approval. You don't need external validation. You are already aligned. I govern myself. Internal governance means your principles decide. Not impulses. Not emotions. Not circumstances. This is why disciplined people look unshakable. They are not rigid. They are resolved. Resolution ends inner debate. Debate drains energy. Decision preserves it. That's the key. Externally governed people are always negotiating. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll start when things calm down. I'll focus when I feel ready. Internally governed people do not negotiate with chaos. They act according to standards. Standards simplify life. I govern myself. When standards are clear, decisions are easy. When decisions are easy, consistency emerges. When consistency emerges, identity solidifies. At that point, self-control is no longer effortful. It is automatic. This is the final transformation. You don't manage yourself anymore. You lead yourself. That's the key. Leadership of the self means you wake when you said you would. You act when it's time to act. You stay calm when others escalate. Not because it feels good, but because it's who you are. I govern myself. Internal governance also means emotional independence. You do not need external events to validate you. You do not need reactions to feel alive. You do not need chaos to feel engaged. Peace is not boredom. Peace is capacity. Capacity to think. Capacity to decide. Capacity to act deliberately. That's the key. When you are internally governed, noise becomes background. Provocation loses force. Distraction fades. Not because you fought them, but because they no longer reach the control center. You don't need their permission to stay steady. You don't need approval to remain disciplined. You don't need validation to be consistent. You have a choice. Most people wait for motivation to govern themselves. Motivation is unreliable. Identity is stable. Build identity. I govern myself. This chapter is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming predictable to yourself. Predictable behavior builds trust with your own mind. Trust removes inner friction. Friction is what drains discipline. Once friction disappears, effort drops. That's the key. An internally governed person does not fight temptation constantly. They encounter less of it. Why? Because their environment, routines, and standards are aligned. Alignment removes negotiation. I govern myself. This is the end of the book, but the beginning of the identity. From this point forward, you pause before reacting, you choose depth over noise, you protect attention, you direct emotion, you stabilize the system, you enforce standards. Not occasionally, not when convenient, but consistently. Consistency is governance in action. That's the key. Here is your final instruction, not as a technique, but as a rule. Live as if your inner world is under your command at all times. When chaos appears, you do not match it. When pressure rises, you slow down. When emotion spikes, you direct it. No negotiation. I govern myself. The world will test this identity. Noise will return. Pressure will escalate. That is not failure. That is confirmation. Every test is an opportunity to reinforce governance. Stand firm. Over time, people will notice, not because you announce it, but because your presence is steady. Calm becomes visible. Discipline becomes quiet authority. That's the key. You are no longer reacting to the world. You are operating within it. You are not at war with chaos. You are unaffected by it. This is the psychology of self-control in a noisy world. Not control through force, but control through command. Say it clearly. Say it daily. Say it when pressure hits. I govern myself. And when you do, nothing outside you gets to decide who you become. The world will not get quieter. The noise will increase. The pressure will intensify. The distractions will multiply. Self-control is no longer optional, it is survival. When you stop reacting, you stop leaking power. When you protect your attention, you protect your future. When you govern your emotions, you reclaim your authority. This is not about being calm once. It is about becoming unmovable daily. Your challenge is simple and non-negotiable. For the next 7 days, respond to nothing immediately. Pause. Breathe. Decide. Because the person who controls their inner world cannot be dominated by the outer one.